All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of O365Eh. In this episode, we're going to be talking about supporting remote workers through COVID, and we're going to discuss some of the things that have come out through the message center on the different services throttling. So each one of us will take a part of that. And then just our last couple of weeks, how it's been working from home, as primarily most of us do, but how are we supporting our remote workers as well and remote clients? So I'm going to start off. So we noticed there was a notification last week from Microsoft that there's currently 44 million daily active users using Microsoft Teams, which is a 50% jump since November, which they're at 22 million. And I guess Michael told me today that there's 12 million users in the last 7 days. So it's a significant amount of users that are basically jumped on utilizing Teams, especially with what's happening in the world with COVID. So you're going to see some throttling that's happening. Hopefully in the short term, and then when those services become available again, we'll be notified around that. So from my last couple of weeks, so we had MVP Summit last week, and at the same time we had so many sessions during the day, and then some of us were doing the ones at night, and there was a lot of different requests from different clients coming in saying like, hey, I need to migrate, or I need to get on this ASAP. So there's definitely been a huge influx of requirement for remote communication and collaboration, right? More than the norm, I would say, right? So I spent a lot of time trying to juggle in between sessions and another client, I guess deliverables and stuff like that to try and meet the need to help, get people over to Teams and provide them with like a collaboration solution. And then I've always, some of the discussions were, how do I, once we get to Teams, because it's really like a expedited deployment. And so how do we, get everything done and completed? So there's like a, governance and stuff like that you have to think about as well. And how do we communicate the application to our client? So I've always been pushing the Microsoft Learning Pathways to, deploy that in your environment and adding that to your Teams client so that you can utilize, that help portion of it as well. And then what's new for well, not for COVID, but Microsoft has developed a sample template for crisis communications, and it's a Power App that you can deploy in your infrastructure and push that to Teams to give the communication to your end users in a central location and keep that up to date from a notification and just trying to keep everybody, I guess, up to date with what's happening around the world and how that affects the company in itself. So, so that's basically my last couple of weeks. Been quite busy, but I'm going to pass it over to Michael to give us his take as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's been intense. I've been living at my desk for it seems like for a few weeks. So MVP Summit kind of started that off, and so yeah, have going to sessions in the middle, like kind of the middle of the day, supporting customers, and then sessions in the evening to kind of follow those two tracks was definitely interesting. Going into some of the throttling items, Microsoft had mentioned that there's some temporary adjustments, and this is as they're ramping up capacity. So things like presence checks have been reduced, as well as the video resolution. I think this is kind of one of the biggest ones that is impacting some of my customers. Is video resolution right now is at 720p. That should be returning back to normal soon. Also, just even things like detecting remote party as they're typing and showing that display, that was also throttled back. Some of the other things I've heard is that chat read receipts were disabled in some regions, depending on just because of the load that it had on the chat backend service. Also, I've had a couple customers have issues with Azure voicemail and the greetings not always playing and just going right into voicemail. But that, again, is just the sheer load that, Hal was talking about, 12 million users in 7 days. I'm sure that's still just ramping up. Talking about this week, Kurt and myself, we presented at the Microsoft Developer Virtual Conference. So we had 2 sessions there. It's still available for, I think, for the next year if you register. So you can see those on demand if you go to aka.ms/DVC. But my kind of the work week has been, supporting end users that have been enabled. I've been doing a lot of work with education institutions, so supporting the instructors as well as helping learners go into teams and doing classes in a new way of learning. Also, even helping organizations use live events to do town halls and getting the updates out to their staff. And then the big one is all these organizations are turning on Teams, mostly for communication, but then how much governance do they need to implement out of the gate so that, after all this that they have, there's not going to be a huge cleanup effort. So, putting in the right governance controls, but also balancing, enabling this work from home immediately. And then telephony, right? So all these people had, or all these organizations could have, handsets at their office that they're no longer, working from. So how do we get, the business communications up and running where now they're working from home? And then just, through all this, you have to keep in mind, like trying to balance that, have that work-life balance. I'm hoping to get a control of that soon, but, right now it's like enabling everyone so that everyone can work from home. Kurt, tell us about your week. Or a couple
Yeah,
weeks.
thanks, Michael. Well, much like you and Habib, I'm just hearing more and more Teams adoption and more organizations adopting it. And yeah, it's been a flurry of activity trying to, help everybody adopt Teams, get on Teams. But it's great. It's exciting. I mean, I think Teams has really shown how well it works for the remote workers. So that's fantastic. In fact, being in Ottawa, having a number of associates and friends working with the Canadian government, I've heard more and more Canadian federal departments adopting Teams and just loving it, like really adopting it, taking it on, using all the features. I'm getting some pretty in-depth questions I don't know off the top of my head and I have to look up. So that's pretty exciting. A couple things to remember though, as this Teams adoption accelerates, especially for organizations that haven't adopted Teams in any way, shape, or form, is just to make sure that you do it responsibly in terms of security and just putting guardrails around things that are aligned well with your organization compliance and rules. So, a couple things you want to make sure of. If you haven't done that synchronization into Azure AD from an identity perspective, just make sure those identities are secure. They have multi-factor authentication from a security perspective. That's always really important. Also from a Teams perspective, federation, that's the ability to communicate with external people outside your organization. That's on by default, which is great, but, just make sure that aligns with your organizational best practices. And guest access, which allows external people to participate in Teams. That's off by default, but can be enabled. And you can actually control in Teams what guests can do in your tenant. So, some just high level things you want to at least know what they're set to before you adopt Teams. Also, Teams is great and people tend to adopt it really quick. So in terms of teams, managing team sprawl and getting too many teams, two things that come to the top of mind that you want to take a look at is there's something called naming policies, which is an Azure AD policy, which can govern the naming of teams. As you get a lot of them, it's really important to put some structure around the naming of them. Also, there's an Azure AD policy which controls the expiry of teams in terms of if they're not being used for so long. They can, auto expire, and they have attestation built in. So if the owners attest that the team is still being used, it'll reset. So those are some things just to think about as teams are being deployed. From a feature throttling perspective, a couple of things that caught my eye was OneNote integration. So from now, for the foreseeable future, I think 2 or 3 weeks, Teams will be in read-only mode for commercial tenants. So OneNote, you'll just be able to read, no writing for that integration with Microsoft Teams. And also with OneNote, they're going to restrict the download of file attachments to 100 megabytes. And there's a couple other things with OneNote, some other temporary restrictions. And if you just, we'll include a link on our blog, but just search for awareness of temporary adjustments to Microsoft OneNote. You'll see all the limitations. From a SharePoint perspective, they're doing some back-end operations which will limit some capabilities, including migration. Might not be as performant. Data loss prevention, you might see some degradation of service there, and file management after uploading a file. For Stream, there's a couple noteworthy limitations. The people timeline has been disabled for newly added videos, and meeting recordings, the resolution will be adjusted to 720p. So something to be aware of. Dino, what's your last week or two been like?
Yeah, I mean, it's like yourselves, it's been fast and furious for sure. In terms of just continuing on the theme of like what Microsoft has been doing in terms of trying to assist here, in terms of throttling, we're seeing like user provisioning taking a bit longer than normal. You know, for example, you talked about directory synchronization. Adding a phone number on-prem might take a lot longer than usual. It might take a couple of hours previous to COVID. Now you may see it take longer than 24 hours for changes to replicate. I'm seeing some delays in authenticating and connecting to Skype for Business Online and PowerShell, so it will connect, but that whole connection process and loading of all the commandlets does take a bit longer. We certainly had some orgs having issues dialing into the shared toll-free dial-in conference numbers. So we've been working very quickly to try to, build out dedicated toll dial conference numbers for these orgs, so that, that help alleviate some of that challenge in users trying to dial into a conference. So that seemed to help alleviate for many of our customers. In terms of my past couple of weeks, in terms of supporting orgs from working from home, I've been splitting my time, I guess, in two key areas. And first off, I've been supporting various Teams pilots that are now turning into full-fledged migrations as a result of COVID. So these were customers that were dipping their toes in the Teams world, and now are looking to do a full-fledged move. Moving the entire company due to the COVID situation. So lots of organizations stepping up their plans because of this. I've been spinning up direct routing for a couple of customers as well that were kind of just doing some initial testing, and now because of COVID, they want to be able to move to Teams, but they've got an enterprise voice workload on Skype, so they're looking at getting direct routing in place. And then just lots of Teams channel support. So many of my customers, we've spun up channels to support the remote worker initiative. So I spent a lot of time just answering questions about how to do certain things in Teams. You name it, like just soup to nuts support in those types of community-based channels. So that's been good. Secondly, I've been helping customers that are having capacity issues on Skype for Business. So I'm seeing like upwards of 5-time increases in conference sessions just due to the whole work from home thing. So before you had 10, 20 people working in a conference room, and so which would be a session, and now you've got those same people now each eating up a session. So this is placing like an inordinate amount of load on Skype for Business. So got many customers kind of scrambling to fix these problems and see what they can do. So there's quality issues as a result of that. A lot of these customers are using VPNs that don't do split tunneling, so we're helping them get organized to move on to split tunneling so that the traffic can traverse and hit the right servers directly versus going over the VPN. And then lastly, some orgs have decided to host large meetings onto Teams to help alleviate this. So if we can move some of that load onto Teams, then so be it. That'll make things better. So yeah, it's been a whirlwind past couple of weeks for sure. With that, I'll pass it back to you, Hab.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, it's definitely been busy the last couple of weeks. And if you're watching the video, you notice that Dino and I have our isolation beards going. So no, it's a great discussion. A lot of really good information that to share. If obviously we'll have all the links that we've been talking about in the blog post, so you can go there as well. And if you have any questions or concerns, just hit us up on Twitter, and or any requests, feel free to do that, and we'll happy to get a session going for that as well. So again, thanks everybody for listening in, and we'll catch you on our next episode.
All right.
Cool. Thanks.
See you.